Support for Seattle Now comes from Lazarus Naturals CBD. Since 2014, maker of non-GMO, hemp-derived CBD products. From the farm to the front door, all of their products are made in the Northwest and crafted in-house, allowing for end-to-end control. They offer a full line of topicals, tinctures, and pet products at LazarusNaturals.com.
Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday, and this is Seattle Now. If we've learned anything about schools this year, it's that they're about more than education. For some students, they're a base for meals and healthcare. For others, education includes social and developmental skill building. That's hard to do over video chat. In a minute, Seattle Times reporter Hannah Furfaro will tell us about the challenge of online schooling for kids with disabilities and how COVID has forced educators and parents to rethink what school means. But first, let's get you caught up. The Western State Coronavirus Pact is intact. Washington, California, Oregon, and Nevada say they'll join forces to ensure the safety of any federally approved COVID vaccine. Governor Inslee says a panel of scientists will check out the safety of any vaccine approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The Western governors are hoping the extra layer of scrutiny will help people feel confident receiving the vaccine. The acting managing nurse at Tacoma's Immigrant Detention Center has tested positive for COVID-19. This comes after 2 guards tested positive at the facility within the last month. According to documents filed this week, the nurse wasn't believed to be infectious the last time she visited the detention center. Detainees and staff will not be quarantined or tested. And Seattle area house prices continue their stratospheric rise. Home prices in the Seattle area jumped 8.5% in August compared to last year. The more affordable end of the market in places like Pierce County seeing even stronger growth, almost 12%. Seattle has the second fastest rising market in the country after Phoenix. We're a little over a month into the remote school year, and one thing we know for sure is that Seattle Public Schools plans to continue operating this way for most students until January. But virtual school isn't working for many students, especially students with disabilities. Hannah Furfaro wrote about the difficulties that families and students are living with right now. She's an education reporter at the Seattle Times. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So in your piece, you wrote about one mom named Caroline who has a son with autism, and you're keeping a lot of the details confidential to protect their privacy. But what can you tell me about Caroline's experience with this online school year?
Sure. Caroline has a son in the Lake Washington School District. He's 17 years old, and he has been diagnosed with autism. He has limited speaking abilities, although he can ask for things like his favorite food or to go out to eat. He really struggles with basic everyday skills. And so when school was in session, he had a lot of one-on-one attention from paraeducators, sometimes outside of the typical classroom setting. And they would help him with language skills and behavioral skills. But when schools closed, almost all of that went away. And so suddenly Caroline had to quit her job at McDonald's and care for her son full-time at home. It was really a struggle for this family. Her son became increasingly violent because he was really frustrated that he didn't have routine anymore. He ended up breaking a family laptop and a tablet out of frustration. Online schooling just wasn't going to work for him or for Caroline. And so it was really a struggle in the spring. And then when school began again this year, he didn't have any FaceTime with paraeducators or teachers until really recently. So at the end of September, the district did offer him time in person. So he has been going to his school for several hours a day, which I think has been a big help for the family.
Okay, so Caroline knew by the end of last year that online school wasn't going to work for her son, and she had to really make this impossible choice to leave her job. And it sounds like the problem wasn't even as much as falling behind in education, but in their development. And in this case, it sounds like her son regressed.
I think that's right. When I talked with Caroline, she spoke quite a bit about the progress that her son had been making before the pandemic. And so I think it was really difficult for her, both emotionally and physically, to suddenly watch him go back in a number of areas. As I said, he became increasingly violent, and that was something that really affected his and her day-to-day life, and I think continues to.
Yeah. And disability can mean a lot of things, and students have a lot of different needs. So can we just talk for a minute about the kinds of supports that schools normally provide for students with disabilities when they are in the classroom?
Sure. I think there's really a range of ways that students are served. So there's kids like Caroline's son, who, as I said, received a lot of attention outside of the typical classroom setting. They were working on things like his behaviors and trying to control things like aggression and anxiety. And then there are kids who receive attention in the classroom setting itself, and they have plans that are written out by their school district that help teachers and paraeducators and aides help address certain things. So, students who are blind or deaf or maybe have a diagnosis like autism, as Caroline's son did, they'll get really individualized attention depending on what their needs are.
And in order to access those services through the school district, students need to be evaluated by the school district, which is also bringing up a significant issue for parents who are waiting to have their children evaluated for special education within the district. And you did speak to a family in this situation. What did they tell you?
Yeah, I spoke with a family. Their son's name is Oliver, and he had been privately evaluated and been diagnosed with autism many months before the pandemic started. And he was actually set to get evaluated by his school for services. So even though he had an autism diagnosis, his school hadn't yet said, here are the things we want to do to make sure that you get everything you need during the school day. And so when schools closed, that evaluation was put on hold. And in my reporting, I learned that Oliver certainly wasn't the only one who this happened to. This state got back to me and said that they had a list of over 1,000 kids who needed evaluations. And in Seattle Public Schools alone, they had about 1,000 on their list. So I'm guessing there are probably more than what the state estimates.
That must just be incredibly difficult on parents waiting for this mechanism, this diagnosis to become real in the classroom.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult for parents and also, just kids like Oliver, who, from what I heard from his mom, was spending maybe 15 minutes a day online in his classes, and then just became frustrated or, wasn't able to stay on track and just really needed that individualized attention that he would get if he qualified for services.
Yeah. And every district and school is essentially writing their own rules. I learned this from your reporting about how to educate students during the pandemic. So this lack of consistency is also an issue. Tell me, Hannah, how this is showing up.
When I was reporting this story, I learned that it really depends on where you live. Your individual school district is deciding if your child will get 2 hours of in-person instruction a day or none. And so this is definitely the case for children in special education, but it's also the case for kids who don't receive special education services. Districts have a lot of power in this state to make decisions in cases like this. And so, in Caroline's son's case, he is able to go in now for several hours a day of in-person instruction, but many districts don't offer any or very limited in-person instruction for kids like him.
I'm curious what your biggest takeaway was from this reporting about parents and students and this model.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, one thing that I learned in my reporting is that although remote learning is certainly going better during this fall than it was in the springtime for many students, a lot of kids in special education, it's really not going well, or they haven't seen improvements, or they aren't able to learn online in the same way that other kids might be. And so, I've been thinking a lot about what I said before about local control and the power of school boards. And I think that although in many cases that local control has allowed them to make decisions that benefit their communities and allowed communities to weigh in on how to do school during a pandemic, for kids in special education, I think it maybe is to their detriment, because in typical times, these kids would have a more standard way of being served, but all of that is kind of out the window now, which I think has been really troubling and difficult for families.
We're in the really early days of remote learning, and we're hearing a lot about the things that don't work. And it's making us think about school and what school is for students. What are you seeing from teachers and school administrators who are thinking about the future and how to make things work better?
I think that a lot of teachers and school districts are using this moment to rethink what school is and what it should be. I think that they're using this time to acknowledge that school wasn't equal before COVID, especially for students of color and for students from low-income homes, homeless students. These are the types of student groups that I think people say we absolutely have to pay more attention to. There's a lot of opportunity for school districts and teachers to get really creative. And certainly from my reporting, I've talked to a lot of teachers who are thinking so carefully about how to make online learning work, whether it's for students who receive special education or students who don't. Teachers who I talk to just really want their kids to learn. They don't want them to fall behind. And so I've been talking to a lot of folks who are trying to figure out ways to make lessons more accessible, like science lessons that might be easier to do with a lab space. They're trying to figure out how kids can do some of that outdoors at home. They're just trying to rethink what school means at home in a lot of ways.
Hannah Furfaro is an education reporter at the Seattle Times. Hannah, really good to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
If you want to read Hannah's story on the challenges online learning poses for students with disabilities, there's a link to it in our show notes. Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Sophie Reed, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow. Hey there. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Every day, our goal at Seattle Now is to bring you insightful, relevant information about this city and beyond. We're living in challenging times, and we're here, listening. But we can't do this work every day without your support. Pitch in any amount that's right for you by using the donate link in our description. And thanks.